Chris Young, and welcome to the UYC Show. Urban Youth Collaborative is a nonprofit 501c3 based in San Diego. Our mission is to support student-led Christian clubs on school campuses and connect local churches to those clubs. This show is a weekly show to tell the story of all God has done through us, to encourage you, the listener, and help explain how this can be done wherever you are. Today we have Nate Landis, the president and founder of UYC. How you doing, Nate?
I'm doing good, Chris. How about you, man?
Doing good. It's good to have you on again. And
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah. And today I hear you have a book coming out. So could you tell us a little bit about your book and how it came to being?
Yes, this is something that I've been burdened with for a long time and have been able to carve out some time over the last few years to write in between all the ministry activities and actually doing what we're writing about. And the point of the book is to inspire churches to get involved in the lives of public school kids, to know that it's not illegal. In fact, it's something that's sorely needed, and it's something that works really well if you do it right. And so the heart behind this book is that it doesn't make people think that the separation of church and state is an impenetrable wall that just can't be crossed at all, but instead there are ways where doors can be opened in that wall. There are ways where the wall can come down. There are ways where you can build bridges over the wall, and lots of traffic can make it back and forth. And we've seen that over and over, and have seen the bridge get wider with certain church-school relationships where you have kids making it over to congregations, and then you have people from the congregations in lots of different ways coming back to serve the school and add value to the lives of students. So that's what we want to see more of in our city and throughout the country and around the world.
Awesome. And I saw that in the preface of your book, you were in a speaking engagement, and it was 47% of youth pastors that were at this event. It was designed for youth pastors, weren't doing anything in regards to campus ministry. Could you expand a little bit on that? Because I know one of the answers was really low bar to start with campus ministry.
Right. Yeah, that was a gripping moment for me and an awakening moment for me. It was something that I was not surprised by per se, but I was heartbroken by, and it was confirmation that this book really needs to come out. I was at the Youth Specialties Conference in Cincinnati several years ago, and their theme that year was campus engagement, school engagement. So they are, for those that don't know, Youth Specialties, it's a training conference for renewal, networking, equipping for interdenominational youth ministries from around the country. And it's expensive, so you have to be motivated to go. You have to have a church that can pay for you. They've lowered the price quite a bit this year, though, $99 to try to broaden and get more people in. But in general, you're still a motivated person in a full-time youth ministry job or a part-time ministry job with resources. Mm-hmm. And so it's a pretty good sample of the creme de la creme, for lack of a better way of phrasing it, of youth ministers and pastors in our country. And I mentioned already it's interdenominational and so on. It's national, so they're traveling and goes to a different city every year. So I'm up there. It's the lunch hour, so it's in between the evening and morning session. There's at least 2,000 people there. The conference that year had up to, I think, 3,000, depending on the session. With all the lights, it's hard to know exactly how many people are in the room. But let's say roughly 2,000 to 2,500 youth workers are in the room from this broad sample of youth ministries across the country. And they had invited 7 practitioners of campus ministry to come and speak. And I was there with 6 other presenters. And right before we got up, they had one of those instant phone surveys where you could whip out your phone and you could basically just respond instantly to this and see the results and the statistics up on the screen. So they said, our focus is schools, and I'm glad they picked this focus. And I know some guys were wishing it was selected long ago, but I was giving them credit for doing it, yeah. Right? And I thought it was great that they had that theme for the whole conference. So anyway, they said, this is our theme, reaching kids on campuses. Who's already doing it? And they gave some really easy, low-hanging fruit, like you mentioned. For example, one of the choices was, we're praying for schools. Another was, we're supporting parents. Another was we're engaging with clubs, so what you and I do at UYC. And so with all of those really easy ways to get on the scoreboard, the biggest response category, the most popular, was 47%. That number still haunts me. Of these professional youth workers picked the category that described them as not doing anything at all currently. Wow. So it was a wow moment. And it was a uh-oh moment, like a emergency moment for me, because that's like half of our country's professional fishermen confessing that they spend no actual time out in the waters. Because if we're going to follow Christ and be fishers of men and women, we have to remember that fish always travel in schools. That's right. You're groaning, but you'll never forget it. But that's the truth that more youth pastors have to hear and groan about, because the Spirit of God is groaning in a much more profound way over the lost kids on our public school campuses. And half of the professional church workers aren't even considering it as a strategy.
Yeah, and there's a stat that blows me away, maybe even more than that, 47%, maybe about the same. 90% of our students who go to public school are not in church. And so if you want to be a disciple of Jesus, you should be following those people, being fishers of men. So could you talk a little bit about the call to action? I know you already talked a little bit about it, but maybe a little bit more.
Of course. So the stat you mentioned comes from a survey we did at the very beginning of UYC's existence over 10 years ago. I remember I was at an event pouring out my heart, and someone came up to me afterwards and said, "How do you know?" And it wasn't because they wanted to dive out and start going after kids. It was sort of like, why are you getting so passionate about something that probably doesn't matter that much? So I basically commissioned this volunteer study. It was an informal study, but we called all of the churches in San Diego Unified School District, which was a huge project, 27 zip codes. If you Google church and the zip codes of San Diego Unified in quotes, then you'll see all the churches that pop up under that zip code. And you have to screen out church's chicken, because we're not going to really ask them that much about, because we kind of know what they do already.
Yep.
And then the other worship centers that weren't Christian in their orientation. There's like the Baha'i Temple or the mosque or certain other groups that we may debate as to whether they're Christian or not. We tried to make a judgment call and figure it out. So we got down to the churches, called them, and asked a few simple questions. For those that would talk with us, not everybody would get back to you. But we wondered, do they have a youth ministry that's going? Do they have a youth pastor? We talked about the 47% of full-time or part-time youth pastors. A lot of churches have no youth pastor. Yeah. And so do you have a youth pastor? And then is the youth pastor full-time, part-time, or volunteer? Mm-hmm. And then a lot of churches do have youth pastors, but they're bivocational. They're working somewhere else and coming over. And some have none identified. So we want to know that. And then, does your church have any campus ministry presence at all? And then, is your student ministry growing, shrinking, or staying the same? There's a relationship between the question about youth group attendance and whether you're engaging at a public school. Mm-hmm. If you wait for kids to come to you versus going to where they are, you'll see a very big difference. Yeah, I'm glad God didn't wait for us to accidentally stumble into heaven, but he actually decided to become a human and go to our games and learn our language and put on blue jeans. And that's what he would do if he was alive today. He'd be at the football game tonight somewhere at one of these schools. I got on the field tonight, too. That's going to be fun. I'm excited. I just got a text about that. But be that as it may, the final question we asked was, does your church have a weekly worship service? And we had to just sort of establish, for some of the church names, it was hard to know whether they really were a Christian church or not, and we weren't going to give them a big theological screener on this. It was just, do you call yourself a church? Are you involved in the lives of kids? So we took that sample, and we looked at the number of kids in public schools, because that's easier to estimate. And then we added up the numbers we got back as a sample representatively from the number of kids in youth groups. And then we gave every kid in every youth group credit for being saved because they were in the youth group, which is a pretty generous assumption. If you sneeze near a church for the purpose of this study, we assumed that you are doing well with Jesus, right? So again, we're just trying to be as generous as we can with this stuff. And even then, you compare the number of kids in public schools with the number of kids in churches, our estimate was 9 out of every 10 kids aren't regularly or meaningfully connected to a local church. So if you ask kids, who, do you go to church? A lot of them will say yes, but then you say, well, how often? And they mean funerals, weddings, Christmas, and Easter. And when we do a banquet, sometimes kids will show up, and they're part of the football team, so they came. Last night we did the Unity Bowl banquet at Bayview Baptist Church because it's equidistant between Lincoln and Morris in neutral territory of the gang divide. And a lot of kids come to church sometimes for the first time for that, or sometimes they go regularly, and sometimes they're in between. But we just wanted to keep making that more and more normal. So I'd love it, because of this emergency, Chris, if people really do need Jesus, this is an emergency. Mm-hmm. If God's really only able to save people through Jesus Christ, then what we've just talked about is a human emergency. And if we care about people, we want them to experience life to the fullest in Christ, and we want them to have a local church to walk that out, so they're not just doing it solo. So 9 out of every 10 kids don't have a regular, meaningful connection with a local church. They might be CEO Christians, Christmas, Easter only. Yep. Then you say, who's your pastor? That's a great follow-up question. And they'll say, the guy in the robe that stands up and says stuff on Sunday. But they don't know. If I tell you my wife and I are doing great, and you ask me what her name is, and I go, hold on just a second, don't tell me, it'll come to me. Hold on, don't tell me. There's probably a lot of distance in my marriage. And with the relationship these kids have with churches, it's really not that common for them to accidentally make it to church. The Generation Z kids are even more disconnected from religion than the millennial generation or the Xers or the boomers or the greatest generation. So as the torch gets passed from generation to generation, we're watching it get dropped more and more. And the light's starting to go out in general. But that's why we need to really be intentional about reaching this next generation at public schools. They're not going to come to us. If we build it, they won't come. But if we go to them, we're going to find they're hungry for spirituality. They might not be hungry for generic religion or institutionalized religion, but they're interested in life and spirituality, and they're willing to consider Jesus, which I love to talk about.
Yeah, and I think with the rotation of youth pastors, I think the stat is, a youth pastor doesn't really stay much more than 2 years on average.
Yeah, it's gone up just a little bit. It used to be 18 months, and now it's about 2 years, a little over. And I've heard it gone up a little even beyond that, but you're just getting your feet wet after 2 years. You're just starting to. We're getting ready at our church to build a building right behind where we're recording, and the building process is going to take over 2 years by the time we plan and we clear the earth and we rebuild it all. That's 2 years, and then we're not going to build it and then leave. We're going to build it and enjoy it.
Yeah.
So anyway, in ministry, the fruit is really in the long haul, not in the short run.
Yeah, I think the encouragement is definitely, to be in there for the long haul, because you're not going to see it all immediately. This is a sometimes even a lifelong process with these students. So I think it was in chapter 2, it might have been chapter 1, but you used the term presbycostal. I wonder if you invented that or
never
not,
heard of that. Yeah.
Could you elaborate on that term and kind of our inclusiveness?
I deny all knowledge of that term, Chris. I'm kidding. I use that because I think it's a funny way of talking about the importance of using both your head and your heart in following Jesus and in doing ministry. God doesn't want us to be separated, severed beings that are divorced and fragmented, but we're supposed to be both knowledgeable of God's word, and the Presbyterians like to emphasize ardor and order, but we're not supposed to just be people of words alone. We're supposed to be about the power of God changing lives. And God said through Jesus, his kingdom isn't just of words, but it's of power. And when John was getting ready to die, he wondered if he had got it right. So he sent his disciples to Jesus while John was in prison, and he said, "Are you the one that was to come, or should we expect another?" And Jesus said to John's disciples, go back and tell John what you have seen and heard. The power of Jesus to raise the dead, heal the sick, feed the hungry, talk to the weather and make the storm stop, and take people who were rejected and reintegrate them into community again, forgive sinners, hang with the outcasts and the least and the lost. Those things were the power of the kingdom of God being manifested in our lives. We need to have both the physical and the spiritual go together. We talk about that in our ministry as being holistic. And the Presbycostal aspects of that bring the integration of a lot of aspects of Christianity together. I am ordained in the Presbyterian Church USA, and I am ordained as an evangelist. I went through all of the vetting and hoops and training and accreditation as a senior pastor would at a specific church. But in the Presbyterian world, I'm ordained into my nonprofit, Urban Youth Collaborative, because they recognized what God was doing in my life and that the call was unique to go after kids that not enough people are reaching. And so I'm one of the few ordained evangelists in the Presbyterian Church USA for work with the next generation. And so that's the Presbyterian piece. And I can talk to budget committees, and I can preach in any kind of context. I love talking to everybody. But the Presbycostal comes from the Spirit of God has to be at work. The fruit of the ministry isn't a degree on my wall. And I've got way too many of those because I've been in school for way too long. But what changes lives is the Holy Spirit. That is a credential in me and through me that can bring about God's kingdom and bring about personal and social change.
That's awesome to hear. So the next chapter, I think that was actually chapter 3, is shots fired. Are you talking about real shots, or what's that about?
Well, in our ministry, we face both. I work in urban communities where there are kids that get gunned down, and I can think of several faces of students right now that lost their lives through tragic circumstances, and they were way too young. I think theologically you could say everybody that dies at 80 is way too young because God intended us all to live forever. Sin and death cut that short for all of us. Anything short of forever is unacceptable to God. However, what is interesting is some of these kids are dying at 13, 14, 12, and it's gang-related, or they're an innocent bystander at a street corner, and people pull up in an SUV and start firing. And so we have shots fired. And fortunately, in my neighborhood where I pastor now and have a church and where I live and raise our kids, there's not as much gang violence as a decade ago, but it's starting to heat up again. We're getting more incidents, and there's when I wrote the book, it's decreased significantly. But since the book has been printed, there has been a resurgence this summer in particular of some gang-related activities. And even without gang-related violence, there's still way too many weekend shootings in our neighborhood. Mm-hmm. It's not uncommon. And kids just sort of get callous to it and still think somehow the bullet won't get to them. But in the end, they're probably aware of their mortality more so than kids in the suburbs or kids in some other rural context. But then school shootings are spreading too. Yeah. We could talk about that on another day. But in general, that's what we mean by shots fired, that urban kids face death at a rate that other kids don't have to worry about quite as much. Everybody does have their own way to die in their own neighborhood. Sometimes it's a drug overdose in an affluent community too. But there's always something that points us to our need for Jesus. The other type of shots fired is we actually had one of the largest school districts here in San Diego County. It's the largest in the state of California. It's the second largest in the nation. It's the 8th largest, San Diego Unified. Question our practices and question the way we do our ministry and whether it's even legal for a Bible study to happen at a public school. And it was actually a great vetting process for us. It was very emboldening for us to have this district send out malicious hate emails about us via 6 of their area superintendents to every middle school and high school principal in the fall of 2015, alleging that we were illegally operating and recruiting volunteers and kids, and we were adults leading this stuff instead of supporting students who were leading. So the legal distinctions which are important here are clubs must be student-led. They must meet during non-instructional time, that's at lunch or before or after school, and they must be voluntary to attend. And so those are the 3 legal variables that make it possible. And then kids can invite their friends. They can invite in a guest speaker. If the surf club meets on campus, the school has to allow a Christian club to meet. A Baha'i club can meet. There's a Baha'i club in town. And there's a group in LA using the same legal framework of the Equal Access Act to try to pursue a Satanist club. So everybody's got an opportunity to make their case, and then at the end of the day, kids in a public school get to decide where are the words of life being spoken. Who are they going to follow? It's a great preparation step for life. We're all going to have to decide where we're going to go for the words of life, and is the person we're listening to really able to deliver on their promises? And so that's what we mean by shots fired. There were a few misinformed, very zealous, very well-connected and powerful leaders in the San Diego Unified School District, despite all the goodwill and all the good we've done for kids over the years, over 120 hours of community service. By that point, it was like 80,000 hours of community service by students, thousands and thousands of dollars in food cards, an unlimited amount of banquets for sports teams, mentoring. Whenever there's a shooting, they call us. The school will, the district might not, but the school will call us, and we'll come in and counsel kids. But at this moment in time, they turned against one of their biggest allies. Fortunately, at the local level, the principals, by and large, were generally supportive of us and knew what we did and knew the district was overreacting to please one really angry, well-connected political mom. And the district's superintendent was quiet. The district's chief lawyer really ran with this because I think she's a general practitioner. She's a good lawyer, general practitioner, though, so she didn't have the same focus of legal expertise that our lawyers had. And particularly, our lawyer looked at some of her writings and memorandums and so on and realized there were some errors there. Whether they were intentional or not, he doesn't know. But the good news is the law and the Lord are clearly on the side of students meeting, students inviting their friends as guests, students talking about the big issues of life. Their First Amendment rights don't get vacuumed out of them when they walk on campus. They're still walking citizens with First Amendment rights, and the Equal Access Act describes those clearly. And they can have meetings on campus. They can invite students. They can invite their youth pastors. They can share the gospel. They can talk about whatever they want to talk about in that space. The school can't edit, censure, or dictate that. And the kids can share about Jesus. They can invite their friends to respond. The kids are not coercively forced to respond. They're able to choose how they respond, just like every other human communication event. At the end of the event, the listener gets to accept or reject the message, and then the kids get to decide what they do. And then kids can invite their friends to local churches because that's part of their life. The district does not control students after hours. Kids belong to families and communities of faith. Kids belong to neighborhoods, and our society is served by public education, but not subject only to public education. So it's something where a partnership can exist, and we've made a lot of friends and a lot of allies. And what was funny during this whole accusation of illegal activity was we had principals leaking this document to us. It was really hilarious. We had private text messages coming in, and I remember you were in a principal's office, and he didn't want to forward it because he didn't want anyone to be able to trace the fact that he was sharing it with us, but he just left it on his screen and had you sit in a chair, and he said, "Read this." And there were 3 separate email campaigns about faith clubs, 2 named our ministry exclusively, and they linked to our church partners and our staff, and they were just trying to drum up as much dirt as they could with the hope of scaring principals and teachers and students away from working with us or groups like us. And the good news is we're stronger today. When that attack happened, we had about 2,500 kids a week that we supported, student-led clubs at 80 different schools. Now we're at 100 schools a week in San Diego and in Mexico, and there are over 3,300 students a week that are hungry for physical and spiritual food, and they're getting those needs met because of God's people and the student leaders on these campuses that are stepping up to make a difference.
Yeah, it's so encouraging to see how far we've come just from that, when we could have thought it could have been the end for us. God really used it to kind of
We weren't
grow
sure
us.
what was going to happen. My oldest son said, "Dad, are you going to lose your job?" And I was like, "No, we're not going to see that happen," but we weren't sure how it was all going to end. We thought our work could be maybe made harder, significantly harder in that particular district, and then I think we were wondering if other districts were going to get the wrong idea too and be misinformed, and we don't want the misinformation about the facts or the law to spread to other districts too.
Yeah, and I would hope if there happens to be any listener that is a part of the district that they would hear that we're not there to take over the school. We're not there to take away kids from, whatever that is they want. We're there to bring support to them, and we're there, for the good of the school. So I want to transition now. We have our first late lunch learning lab coming up in about a month. Could you explain what the late lunch is?
Yes. The late lunch is a training and networking time for youth pastors or other parachurch ministries or senior pastors or parents or teachers or coaches, anybody connected with kids at schools who wants to reach the next generation. And we get together around some really good food. We always make sure the food's memorable. It's not like a ham sandwich and a soda, but we'll cater something really nice so it's memorable. We actually spend more than we should on that, and I think it's worth it. I think it's worth making everybody feel special and appreciated. And then we hear some best practices in campus ministry from practitioners who are out there in the trenches doing it, local youth pastors that are serving on a consistent basis, faithfully and effectively at a middle school or a high school in our neighborhood, and then throughout the county. It's a countywide gathering. And then we also bring in some experts in youth ministry from time to time, as well as practitioners to share. And this month, coming up in October, we're privileged to have Luma Haddad from Young Life. She's the South Bay area director and also speaks nationally. She's been in ministry. We're talking about the importance of longevity. And she's been in ministry for several decades and has seen fruit in decade 1 and decade 2 that you would never be able to see if you just sort of hung up your sneakers after 2 years because you got a better offer or your senior pastor didn't understand you or it got hard. And I put the fault of short youth pastor tenures on both the church and the youth pastor. I think both groups have a role to play, and we can do better on both sides to make it more common to have youth pastors have these legacy calls instead of these sort of light bulb calls, I call it, where you turn them on, screw them up, turn them on, and then they get burned out, and then you unscrew it and replace another one. And I think the light of the world, Christ, is better served by youth pastors that can burn bright for a long time.
Yeah. Alrighty. Well, do you have any final thoughts before we go?
Well, we'd love to have people come out to the late lunch. If you're not involved with us yet, you're not making a commitment by signing your name in blood to show up. You're just learning more about what's going on and hearing encouraging stories from people that are actually doing this. It's not theoretical. It's actually really happening all over. We mentioned there's 100 schools every week in San Diego County and another 22 schools in Mexico that we serve. And it's really taking off and gaining momentum. And we want you to be a part of it. We want to have more youth pastors make it normal to be at a public school. Just as we asked in that survey at the beginning, does your church have a weekly worship service? We're assuming if you're a church, there's some place and time where you're gathering together as an ecclesia, a group of called out people, a community. And if that's happening, then chances are you might be a church. Wouldn't it be neat if it was also normal, Chris, for churches to get together with other pastors? That's something that's not normal enough either. And I would love it if pastors asked each other, not just, when does your church meet and where? And then the next question is usually, how big's your church, right? The pastors sort of have this unspoken way of checking with each other. Sometimes it's out loud. Sometimes it's not. How big's your church? Oh, mine's this big. How about you? But what if they also ask, what school has your church committed to? What if that was just as normal as, when's your weekly worship service? What's your denomination? What's your church structure like? How big is it? Or whatever, however you measure success. You can have big significance at mini churches too, of course. Mighty mini churches, storefront churches, middle-sized churches. The impact's more important than the size. But that being said, what if it was normal for churches to partner with schools? And we've been through the ringer, we've been through the gauntlet, and if it was illegal to do what we do, we wouldn't be here having this conversation all these years later. And we just want to get that vision out there. The book is called God Wants His Kids Back, Schools of Thought to Reach a Lost Generation. And Schools of Thought, of course, is a play on words. And we'd love for you to pick up a copy and get involved. Tell us what you think. Tell us what questions you have. Share some stories of successes that you're having, maybe some struggles that you're facing, and we could talk about how to overcome them together. We've seen a lot of different things happen over the years, and we may have a solution, or we know a church that's gone through something else that would be similar. So we'd love for you to pick it up. It'll be available on Amazon and also be available online and in hard copy where I speak, and we'd love for you to be part of the conversation and then go out and try it.
Awesome. Well, as Nate said, the Late Lunch Learning Lab is going to happen October 1st, 2018. That's a Monday. We hope for you to be there. It's 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. Lunch will be provided. If you are involved with UYC or in campus ministry in general, we'd love for you to be there. If you're just interested and kind of want to learn about how we do things on campus, then we would love for you to be there as well.
Yeah. Just to mention, sorry to interrupt, anybody that's interested at all, you don't have to be a youth pastor, you don't have to be a senior pastor, you don't have to be a church volunteer. If you are a human who cares about the next generation, then we'd love for you to come. And like I said, you're not making a commitment if you show up. You're just checking out what God's doing as the Holy Spirit blows through this next generation, and you can find different ways of being involved and just checking it out, too, to see what it's all about.
Awesome. Well, for Nate, I'm Chris. Thank you for listening to the UYC Show. For next episode, we will have a UYC staff interview with Dan Bauk. He'll be on to discuss his position with Urban Youth Collaborative. Visit our website at uyc.org. That's the letter U for Urban, Y for Youth, and C for Collaborative.org. And please consider making a monthly donation on our secure website so that we can expand the work that God has called us to. It would be greatly appreciated. If you have any questions, email us at podcast@uyc.org. God bless you and have a great day.
Have a great weekend, everybody. God bless you.